Okay, so we move to item 3.1, which is approval of the agenda and a motion to adopt.
So moved.
Moved and seconded, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So move to agenda item 4, which is bylaws, and we have item 4.1, bylaw 3149, fees and charges amendment for adoption, and that council adopt the City of Duncan fees and charges amendment bylaw number 3149 2015, a bylaw to amend the sewer and garbage fees, and the housekeeping amendment to the animal control impoundment fees.
So moved.
Moved, thank you. Seconder, any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. We move to item 4.2 on the agenda, bylaw 3117.01, business license regulation amendment bylaw, and this is for adoption. And that council adopt business license regulation amendment bylaw number 3117.01 2015, a bylaw to include provisions to make it clear to applicants that all laws, local, provincial, and federal, must be adhered to in order for business license to be granted.
So moved.
Moved, and Ms. Seconder? Seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Duncan opposed, and that motion passes. So we move to item 4.3, which is bylaw 3081.01, inter-community business license amendment bylaw for adoption. And the council adopt the inter-community business license amendment bylaw number 3081.01 2015, a bylaw to add marijuana-related business to the list of excluded businesses under the inter-community business license scheme. And a motion to adopt.
So moved.
Moved. Seconder? Seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Jackson.
I think it might be helpful if, through you to Mrs. Robertson, for her to perhaps just give an overview of the discussion with the lawyer and what actually brought us to this place. Because for people who haven't been following it all the way along, it seems to perhaps have come out of the blue when in fact it did not.
Okay. I won't get into specifics of specific legal advice, but basically the business bylaw requires nonprofit societies and businesses to have a valid license, and storefront marijuana dispensaries are being denied by the city because of the illegal use federal law. And so what's sort of been confusing to some applicants is the differences between the actual local, provincial, and federal laws related to the storefronts. And that's why they've been sort of popping up, if you will, in other jurisdictions. The city's business license requires both nonprofit and for-profit businesses to obtain a business license, and therefore when an applicant comes to us and puts in an application, we are denying them currently, and that has been supported by council resolution, that we're denying them right now because it's federally illegal to do so. It is difficult, though, to explain that to folks who have other dispensaries in other jurisdictions, and I'll use Nanaimo as an example. They do not have a requirement in their business license bylaw for a nonprofit to obtain a business license. So they are, in effect, not required to go through the local government. They then will put a storefront up, and then what happens is that the enforcement of that defaults to the RCMP. And they're just overwhelmed right now with other larger issues. And so the RCMP have actually approached local governments to say it would be helpful for us if we had zoning bylaws locally and business license bylaws that would support the efforts until such time as the law changes. And that's why it gets a bit confusing. And so when people phone us and ask about it, it's quite a process to have to explain all of that. So if we had on our applications that you are in fact required to meet local, provincial, and federal legislation, I think it will alleviate some of that confusion, because the federal oversees the use, the provincial oversees the giving of a nonprofit status, and then of course there's your local bylaws with the land use of that product. So hopefully that helps out. And the inter-community business license that we have here, recently we did an undertaking with 12 other municipalities whereby if someone is operating from community to community, they could get a business license, an inter-community one in their home jurisdiction, and that would allow, for example, say a home renovator who's doing business in Nanaimo can go to Ladysmith and go to Duncan or go to Campbell River, any of the participating municipalities, without having to get a separate license for each one of those things. Now, granted, even if you had an intercommunity license, you are still required to meet the bylaws of the local jurisdiction. And in this case, it would be Duncan is denying the business license applications for nonprofits for the use until it becomes federally legal. But this just helps to clarify that it's not a use that just because you have a dispensary in Nanaimo that you can now come to the city of Duncan under that license application here in the city of Duncan. So I think hopefully that clarifies.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. If you got an
And
additional
just sort of
question?
for further clarification, that, that these amendments will only last as long as the federal government makes up its mind about what the regulations are going to be. And at that point, we will likely be looking at this again.
The federal government does not oversee zoning issues. So, for example, if the council decides that they want to continue with a prohibition throughout the city of Duncan boundaries in the future, that is an option for council no matter what the federal government approves. Having said that, staff are doing a full zoning bylaw review, and different options will be presented back to council as to what course of action you want to go forward with, and we would have that ready for the time when the federal government changes that legislation and we know what it looks like. So we would have options then for council to either continue banning them, or you can look at it, as noted earlier, on a case-by-case basis where a particular individual comes and says, I would like to put up a dispensary at this location, and they make a zoning application. Or we could take a look at it from like maybe 300 meters from schools, or whatever type of criteria that council deems necessary. And right now the planner is working on that. It's just that there's legal reviews, departmental reviews, more public meetings to follow, and staff are unsure when that legislation might change. So this is at least a temporary solution so that council is not in a reactionary mode and can give a more thoughtful approach about how it wants to proceed.
Thank you.
Okay. Further discussion on Councillor Duncan?
Thank you, Your Worship. So what we're currently doing is we are changing the bylaws so that afterwards, when the federal government makes changes to the rules, basically, we're going to have to go through this process again. We're going to have to go through a public hearing again. We're going to have to do all the paperwork that we're doing right now again. So I see this as a complete waste of time. The gentleman from Shawnigan Lake has said that we should actually take a step back and wait for the federal government to bring in the rules, and that's what I think we should be doing. We're putting the horse behind the cart, and I think at this stage we're I don't see every municipality in British Columbia running out and changing their bylaws to prohibit this use. I think that we're jumping the gun. We're spending a bunch of money on changes that we're going to have to look at again as soon as the federal government changes the rules that are in place. And we have seen they've already rolled back some of the rules that they said they would right away. Rules, for example, on reporting on Revenue Canada. They've already rolled that stuff back. So we could be in this position 3 weeks from now, reviewing these same bylaws that are being passed now.
Okay. Further discussion? Councillor Staples.
So I recognize this as it puts us in such a strange position. When we were at, I think it was the UBCM last year, Vancouver did a session with us about this exact issue, right? And how they dealt with it. We had a different government at that time, and they had stores popping up all over, but they did not have any zoning bylaws in place. So stores were showing up right beside schools. There was a lot of illegal marijuana being sold. There was a lot of issues going on, and the police couldn't even keep up with it. So it became something that was a problem for the community. So they created a set of amazing bylaws, I think, that we definitely can use as a template for what we can do here. And then the council had to actually decide, because staff did not feel comfortable signing the documents. Because if staff signed those bylaws, staff would be federally liable for signing something that was illegal. And when he talked about it, so council had to make that decision for council to actually be the signatories on the bylaws and not staff, and also approve the individual business licenses that were created. And so when I've been thinking about this over the holidays since we first talked about this just before Christmas, and I feel like I feel more comfortable if we were to put ourselves in a position, we are developing our bylaws, where we weren't waiting for the government. Not that I don't think the government will do it, I think that they will. I feel like I know that they will. But I don't know how long that's going to take. And we're already establishing our bylaws. So I do feel similar to what Tom is expressing, where I feel like we're kind of jumping the gun in a sense, because we know this is going to change, and we need to be discussing how we're going to deal with that change. And so I'm uncomfortable, and I'm actually speaking to 4.4 really, I realize, not necessarily 4.3, because I feel more comfortable until we have our local bylaws and zoning bylaws established, rather than waiting for the federal government, which is where we were at months ago when we initially had this discussion.
Okay, thank you. Is there further discussion? Councillor Bell?
Well, now I'm wondering if I'm speaking at the wrong time, so let me just...
Well, right now, we're speaking, this is with respect to the adoption of the 4.3, which is the intermunicipal or intercommunity business license. There will be more, if you want to speak to the zoning bylaws specifically, that's the next item on the agenda.
Well, I'm just going to jump in now, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Further to, I hear what Councillor Duncan is saying, and I also hear where you're coming from, and all the people in the audience, and I think that we are being put in an unusual position because we're having to make a decision on something that is very divisive, and it is, there are very polar opinions on it, and I don't think that's my decision to make, and I'm actually don't even know where I stand on the issue, because there's pros and cons to everything. Everything's gray. There is no right or wrong for everything. I'm in support of this regulation not because I'm in sort of prohibition, even that word makes me cringe. And I actually have done a lot of research and courses at UVic on drug policy and where they came from. And I know that drug policies have come from usually racism, and I also know they've come from just money and corruption. But having said that, it is divisive. And it does make people uncomfortable, and we were raised in a generation where marijuana is illegal. The next generation coming up, there's hopefully lots of different changes, and they will be challenging our laws and where they came from and why. We're not quite there yet, and so when we have business owners that have been supporting Duncan and have businesses in here that are nervous and saying, well, what is this going to do to my business and my shop? I can't be convinced to, but this is money over here. It might be new money, but we have lots of tradition here as well. So I really think the reason for this, and this is the reason I've agreed with it, is because we're saying, let's just pause so that they don't pop up all over the place and people aren't just doing it. And let's talk to the community and ask the community what they want. And I'm sure we're going to be pretty divided, but we can strike a committee, we can talk to our existing businesses and talk to the businesses that are wanting to come forward to talk in Duncan. We've had to make difficult decisions on lots of things in Duncan and done it in the past, and I really think that this would be one of those things so that we don't turn up like Shawnigan Lake, where the conversation is distorted through the media. Half the community's mad, the other half the community's not mad. Maybe we can get some stickers, maybe some people can do some things in City Hall and get so angry about it. Let's just have a conversation, because most of it's from fears. So if we just put something in place where we can have the conversation and do the right thing that works for everybody, it's better than I'm right and you're right. So I just feel like if we take a position at this point, then we're going to be redoing everything anyways. Because if we don't do something, we're going to be redoing it anyways. And the police don't want to be regulating it. It is not the place to be doing it. So I'm in support of this, to take a breath and let's get something together that makes sense. And we're waiting for the federal laws. We're up in airs. We don't know what they're going to do. So.
Okay, any further discussion?
What she said.
I'm going to add something. This is, and I agree with some of the comments made on both sides. I certainly, my feelings with respect to the use of it for medical purposes, and even for those who prefer to have it on a recreational basis. There are other legalized forms of altered state in our society that maybe is damaging or far more damaging. I don't know, but in this particular case, I think staff have put strong thought to it. We've received legal advice because we are, at this time, reacting to applications for business license for locations, and it's a challenging spot to be in, and I agree with Councillor Bell's comments with respect to this provides the pause, and for us to thoughtfully look at our zoning bylaws, which we're reviewing right now in a comprehensive way for many uses, not just this. This would provide us that opportunity to establish sets of bylaws with the research, and I know that City of Vancouver and City of Victoria have taken that step as well. But the reactive side of it is dealing with things happening before we get that work done, and I think that this gives us that pause, gives us that time to make thoughtful consideration, and then as federal laws change, and we expect that they will, we'll be able to adapt our bylaws towards that end. So I think it gives everybody an opportunity to have a reasonable deliberation and discussion about it. So I agree with those statements. Councillor Duncan.
Just a question. Does our current business license prohibit illegal uses? Yes. So why are we passing a bylaw now to double that and make it, if we already have in place a business license requirement that we don't give a license to someone that wants to do something illegal, why are we passing these bylaws?
Mr. Derbytai?
It's two-pronged. One is about clarity.
Can you turn your mic on? I'm not sure if it's on.
It's always on. Maybe
Yes.
I'm just
Okay.
not eating the mic enough. It's about clarity. The bylaw says that the city would suspend or cancel, revoke a license if the business is acting illegally, as opposed to issuing it in the first place. So this just clarifies that we're not going to issue one in the first place if it's going to be an illegal activity. So it's a bit of just to eliminate sort of having to stumble through that process of awarding something and then revoking it immediately. So that's what this bylaw, that one in particular does. The intercommunity one, that one is just to make it, again, for clarity, because you can't, it's an illegal activity within the city we wouldn't be giving out a business license ourselves if it's an illegal activity. So if you happen to have a license from Nanaimo, Victoria, wherever that is, and that doesn't afford you the opportunity to set up shop in the city of Duncan. And then, well, lastly is the next bylaw that's on the case, but as was mentioned several times, it's just about being able to create that pause and consider all of those interests that have already been heard from tonight, and do that in a thoughtful and reasoned fashion.
Okay, thank you. So is there any further discussion from council on this? Councillor Staples.
Can I add timely to that statement? A thoughtful, reasonable, and timely fashion. So it's not, I just don't want to be, at the end of our term in 3 years and this hasn't been dealt with.
Yeah. There will be some discussion during the rezoning bylaw update that we are doing, and council can determine that at that time as a council, whether you wish to enact something, whatever that looks like at this time, or whether you want to wait. Until the federal government comes up with specific legislation that makes it legal, it's still currently illegal to have a storefront dispensary, and thus puts a staff in an uncomfortable position, as mentioned by Councillor Staples.
Okay. Thank you. Further discussion?
I think what we have to understand here is that this isn't a pausing situation. If we were pausing to take a look at it, then we would table this bylaw and wait for the rules. What we're doing is proceeding with a change to our zoning bylaws. We're not pausing anything. We're going ahead and bringing in laws that prohibit medicinal marijuana. That's what we're doing. So I think that we've heard someone mention that this is a pause. This is not a pause. This is a done deal after you vote on this.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson?
Well, the point being, it is a pause. What would, if we didn't put these things in, it's conceivable that 7 dispensaries might have been in downtown Duncan. What's the local shoe store going to think about that? What are the local dress shops going to think about that? What's that? I have to state categorically that whoever wants to smoke marijuana can smoke marijuana. It's not my drug of choice, but I have no ethical issues with it at all. But I want to consult with the business community and with the people who actually live here. People who live in other cities and who run very viable businesses and employ people. I think that's absolutely wonderful. But I have to be responsible to my constituents and the business people who presently support the city with their taxes. So I do see it as a pause. I do see it as temporary, and I'm sorry if it inconveniences some people, but, you know, I would like to know that we would have all of our ducks in a row by the time this is brought out, and when the new bylaw comes out after the federal government does its law changes. I don't see it as anything other than a pause, allowing us to do it right the first time. It was suggested a little bit earlier that, you know, why didn't we allow business to open and see how it goes? You can't just allow a business to open and see how it goes and go, oh man, we made a mistake, and then withdraw their business license. That's not the way it works. So I want to do it right, and I want to do it respectfully for not only the people who live here, but to the new business people who could conceivably be moving into the city.
Okay, so is there any further discussion on the motion? Councillor Bell.
I do want to add that we were equally cautious with fast food, and we have been equally cautious with pubs and anything that serves alcohol, and even when we were doing the market and they were talking about business licenses in the market, we were we were equally cautious about that, because we were talking about what do we want for the downtown. We've got different ideas for each different area of downtown, and that's what we're talking about. Is we didn't want a bunch of Tim Hortons opening up right here. Not that we don't like Tim Hortons, because we do, and they are a viable business, and they hire lots of youth that I work with, and I love them, and they're a great Canadian business. But do we want 4 of them on the corner? No. And same with restaurants. We went through how many seating, what will this work, when do we want them open in the square, when do we not want them open in the square, to be good neighbors. And so I think this is the same process we did with all the other things. It's not, I know marijuana is controversial for some people and it's uncomfortable, but for me, I'm making the decision like I would as if we were talking about any other shop that's opening up. We do the same for color scheme, and we do the same for building materials. It's about a downtown core, and what do we want for the downtown core? And those decisions have always been made by the community and the people in the community. So for us to change that randomly would be unusual for us. We've always had, even right now, as you see, dog licenses. It's something that we do as a community. So.
Okay. So if there's any further discussion, if not, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And Councillor Duncan opposed. Thank you. So we move on to item 4.4. This is for bylaw 3150, 2015 rezoning amendment bylaw, third reading and adoption. And this was the bylaw with specific to the public hearing. That council consider giving third reading and adoption of zoning bylaw amendment bylaw number 3150, 2015, a bylaw to add the marijuana operation to the list of prohibited uses in all zones.
So moved.
And a motion, moved, seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Duncan.
I just have to reiterate my comments. We aren't pausing. We're passing new bylaws, and that is not how you pause. We've heard our councillors talk about consulting the community. There was no consultation with the community. When did we? This was the consultation, a public hearing. So I don't think that we've actually considered a lot of the information that the community could have brought forward. The other thing about a huge number of medicinal stores opening, I don't see that happening. In fact, there's more drug stores within 2 blocks of here. There's 6 of them within 2 blocks of this building in downtown already. So, I think we've put the cart ahead of the horse, and we're going to end up spending a bunch of money to go through all these bylaws that we're actually passing, not pausing. Thank you.
Okay. Further discussion? Councillor Jackson.
I know, I won't. No, I'm going to say, you look at a city like the size of Victoria that has more marijuana dispensaries than they have Starbucks. Got 24 marijuana dispensaries and 15 Starbucks. Obviously we're not going to have 24 in Duncan because Victoria's 10 times our size. But, if that's actually going to happen, I want the community to be on board with it.
Okay, I'm going to challenge to go back and forth, but just if you've got some new points.
Just
Thank you.
one more point would be that we're talking about medicinal marijuana, not recreational. And in fact, the way that it's being proposed is that recreational would be handled through the liquor stores, and there are no liquor stores in Duncan, so we're outside our jurisdiction.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Duncan opposed, and that motion passes. So we move on to a motion to adjourn. A 1-1 bylaw, sorry. Are we, yes, 4.5, so I'm sorry. This is bylaw offense notice enforcement amendment bylaw adoption, and this is with respect to bylaw number 3118.06, a bylaw to assign fines to newly added sections of the business license regulation bylaw and housekeeping amendments.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Seconder? Do I have a seconder? I don't see anybody.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Ms. Robertson, do you want to just give the context for this one? Because I believe it's separate from the other ones.
Sure. Each time there's an amendment to any regulating bylaw, we also have to amend the bylaw, offense notice bylaw by default. And in this case, now that we do have newly added sections to the business license bylaw, et cetera, we need to add those into the bylaw offense notice bylaw. So we also decided to do a bit of a housekeeping amendment that where staff is recommending that fines for obstructing a bylaw enforcement officer in the performance of their duties be added for that, so that we would have the ability to ticket for that under this particular ticketing scheme.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Duncan opposed, and that motion passes. So we move now to adjournment. And
So
Councillor
moved.
Duncan usually likes to
Oh, sorry.
pass this one.
Yeah. Take it
Okay.
back.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. So next meeting we have is a committee of the whole meeting, a regular committee